Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of raising a family and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lindy Buckingham Shutt, a professor of human nutrition, guest co host, and a mom to one sweet angel baby and one young, joyful eater.
Yes, and we love having you here this season, Lindy, talking all about kids and food. Great opportunity for us to dive in, and we love having you as our guest co-host. Or maybe I should speak for myself. I love having you as my guest co-host. I feel like Barb and Mackenzie DeYoung would feel the same way. So,
Mm,
last
thank
week
you.
you might remember we were talking about temperament and food and kids and how they impact each other. That temperament does influence what our kids eat. It also influences what practices are effective and what we choose to do as parents when it comes to food. So temperament is a factor here. And this week we're going to be talking about what?
So, this week we are going to be talking about feeding our kids and to ourselves, but in the first 1,000 days of life. So, this would be pregnancy through 2 years old.
Mm-hmm. And so this first 1,000 days, let's like dig right in.
Oh, yes.
This is kind of a definition, still kind of following my usual vibe. Love a definition.
Love.
But if you have worked in the child development realm or are in a like field that's like adjacent, right? That kind of works in some added like version of what kids do and what kids need. You've maybe heard this term before, first 1,000 days, but just in case, we also know a lot of people haven't heard it. And like, so like, what's the big deal? Like, why are we talking about first 1,000 days, Lindy?
Okay. Well, it's a big deal, and a lot of people will tell you, but the American Academy of Pediatrics told us that the most active period of neurological development, aka brain development, occurs in the first 1,000 days of life. So
Hmm.
that's beginning with conception and ending at the start of the third postnatal year. So pregnancy through 2 years old.
Yes. And I remember, in one of my like undergraduate classes learning, about child development and stuff, and they talked about like critical periods or sensitive periods. And I remember it was almost kind of this urgency, right? Like,
Mm.
this is your chance, don't miss it.
Oh yeah.
And so I feel like that can sometimes put a lot of pressure on us as parents, right? Sometimes, like, okay, well, I didn't know this when they were that age. I missed the critical period, right? And it's like, okay, hold on. I really liked the way that Cusick and Georgioff they kind of phrased this idea of a sensitive period. They talked about it that can actually let's think about it in a positive manner. That it can describe a time when the brain is particularly receptive to positive input like nutrition or social stimulation. And so this idea, instead of like it's urgent, it's critical,
Mhm.
don't miss it, but like, hey, this is a great opportunity of a time when we can have great impact because of what's happening in the brain.
Yes,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, and I liked that positive swing, right? It's a critical period, it's a sensitive period, it's a opportunity period.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I think again, just being very clear that just because you maybe didn't do some of these things as a parent, you did not ruin your child. They are likely totally fine, but we're just going to share some information about the first 1,000 days of life and what you can do or maybe share with someone else to do.
Yes. And yeah, so if you are listening to this episode already and you're like, "Oh, first 1,000 days, missed my chance." If you are listening continuing to listening to make yourself feel bad, we don't like that. We don't want you to do that. So you can continue to listen and be like, "Hey, this is interesting." Like you said, share with a friend or family member.
Yeah.
But the goal is not to make anybody feel bad. We're talking about how can we like the word that comes to mind is kind of optimize. Like, how can we make the
Mm,
most of it these first 1,000 days? And yeah, you likely still have like wonderful, beautiful, healthy kids, even if you
yes.
didn't know all this information.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about why. So it's like, okay, first 1,000 days, a sensitive period, lots of brain development happening. Why nutrition? Like, why do we got to think so much about food during this first 1,000 days?
Well, I mean, we always want to think about food, right? I mean, I
Always
always
food.
want to think about food, but we know based off of a wealth of scientific literature, so specifically the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which is a federal report that is accumulation review of all of the most recent scientific literature in the last 5 years, looking at nutrition, feeding. What it tells us is the time from birth until the child's second birthday is a critically important period for proper growth and development.
Hmm.
It's also key for establishing healthy dietary patterns that may influence the trajectory of eating behaviors and health throughout the life course. So this again, like you said, this opportune time where we're really seeing a ton of growth and development, specifically brain development. So,
Yes.
other literature has said that, up to 80% of brain development happens within this first 1000 days. So, making sure we're, adequately, properly feeding our kiddos and then also offering that opportunity to really influence their eating behaviors for the rest of their lives.
Yes.
Is important. And then I'm not going to get into the weeds on this because it can go there. But there's a thing known as epigenetics, which is what we eat, other environmental factors influence our genes, our genetics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so food can do that. And during pregnancy, it's really cool to think about that what you're doing is affecting obviously what your baby's doing, but then also to think about that influence that you have on your baby and what you're eating during pregnancy is also going to have an influence on your baby's baby, so your grandchildren.
Oh, yes. That what we are doing, yeah, epigenetics. What we are doing can be passed down to generations. And again, not meant for pressure, meant for an opportunity, right? Like we have an opportunity. How cool.
Yes. Yes.
So there are benefits of nutrition affecting our brain development, right? That's a part of what we're
Mhm.
taking in. And then yeah, epigenetics, cool. And then another study that Lindy had shared with me talked about how adequate macronutrient nutrition, aka like our big food groups, right? Like proteins, carbs, fats, vegetable consumption, right? Things like that. In general, that when we get adequate nutrition, it has an impact on IQ scores. It can influence our school success and even our behavioral regulation, which, I mean, hey, oh, we heard about all about that in season 9. We didn't even talk about, I don't think, how food could have a role. But so there's kind of these like abstract and these long term impacts of this awesome sensitive period when it comes to food. We can have great opportunity for great impact, right?
Definitely. And something that I think we're going to point out now because we're going to talk about it throughout, but children in this age group consume small amounts of food, right? So it's
Yeah.
very important to make every bite count. So we have the ability during this period to make those small little bits of food they're eating or the introduction to this food really matter.
Oh yeah, yeah. When they're not taking in very much, and when there's such important things they need, right? Like fats and vitamin D, and I mean, it could get really specific. And I know you could. I know you could definitely get really specific.
Yeah.
But when there's so much they need, and yeah, there's only so much space in those little stomachs. That yeah, we want to make sure that we make it count. Get lots of good stuff in there that they need.
Mhm.
Awesome. So okay, we understand why the first 1,000 days. What are we talking about with that? Big opportunity for brain development, all kinds of development. Nutrition is an important part of that, right? Important part of help we help grow healthful kids. Let's break down this first 1,000 days a little bit, all right? We'll talk a little bit about the research around some recommendations that are research based, but we'll also talk about some of the reality of
Mhm.
these different stages. So we'll break it down kind of into pregnancy, the first year, and then, I mean, the rest of the 1,000 days. So let's start with pregnancy. Okay. Now, I kind of want to kick it off by just like, let's acknowledge the reality that you may have in pregnancy. Okay. We are going to talk about the recommendations, but some of the things that could impact food consumption when we're pregnant. Sometimes cravings, right? Sometimes people have a big hankering for whatever it is. One of mine, it was short lived, but blueberry pie. I don't know if I'd ever had it
Ooh.
before that, but like, and it's not that I wanted it all the time. I wanted it once. I just really
Yeah.
needed to have that one time. But
That
cravings
that yeah,
are
that happened to me with blueberry muffins, and it was at, like, 10 o'clock in
oh,
the morning. It was
yeah,
during COVID, I was working from home. I went and made blueberry muffins immediately in that moment, and then I did not probably eat them the rest of my
right?
pregnancy.
Like I didn't even
Mhm.
like I don't even need to finish it, right? I didn't need a whole blueberry pie. Oh, but yes. So the cravings are a component of pregnancy, and sometimes the flip side of food aversion, right? Like, ugh, not that. I literally heard a story last night of someone talking about like, oh, my coworker would eat hard boiled eggs, oh, right? Um, and then nausea, right? Similarly related, some often referred to as morning sickness, but if you've been pregnant, which if you're listening, you may have fallen in that category. That can be tricky. Not always in the morning.
Yeah.
Right. So nausea being another one. Also sometimes the reality is not everyone's always aware they're pregnant right away. So as you think about this recommendation, this information, you may have not even been prepared. Like, well, I wasn't thinking this is what was happening. And so we can acknowledge that that is sometimes the case too. And then also exhaustion. I have a good friend who's expecting, and they're like, "You didn't prepare me for how tired I would be." And so, literally, as you think about planning meals or preparing meals, what your lifestyle looks like when this huge increase for sleep that your body is screaming at you can impact what you eat. And so there's just a lot that's happening during pregnancy that can impact how we can take in these recommendations and what we do choose to do, and sometimes almost like default out of or into with pregnancy. So that's a little bit of reality. We want to acknowledge that all of that can be happening, and even like perinatal depression, right? There's all of these
Mm.
different things that can be a role. But let's look at why pregnancy, right? There's recommendations that are important, but also just some cool things about pregnancy from our perspective as educators too, right?
Yeah, yeah. So pregnancy is a really fascinating time for me to talk about because one, I've been pregnant, but also during grad school, I worked in a research lab that did a lot of stuff with pregnancy, and we always talked about the power of pregnancy because it is this time period that we also call a teachable moment. So what this means is because of that special moment in time, someone's more likely to adopt a new behavior and maybe sustain that behavior. So in this case, they're more motivated to do so because you're growing a baby. It's this time of you might be more motivated to do something not only for yourself, but because you're growing a little baby inside of you and you want that baby to be strong and healthy and happy.
And then, yeah, as a parent educator, I also think about we often talk about the transitions that happen in parenting are times when we have questions, right? And when we're seeking more information. And so it is, yeah, we also call it a teachable moment because we have questions, we're looking for information, and hopefully you can find it right here. So a lot of power in pregnancy. So what are the recommendations? In particular, I know we're looking at some recommendations from Patrol. I struggle with this one. Petrobelli and Agasti. And I loved that they were talking about childhood obesity in the paper, but they talked about it in a way of obesity is when there's a mismatch of energy consumption and energy expenditure. And I love that that was like a better whole picture. We're not just talking about body size or weight or things like that, but how we're balancing energy consumption and energy expenditure when we think about childhood obesity, and that we have opportunities even in pregnancy to positively influence it. So, what are some of those recommendations, Lindy?
Well, the first one, kind of overall in general, maybe not a surprise, is you're expecting parents' behaviors are important. So the food that you're eating. So especially when you're pregnant,
Hmm.
think about what you're eating, balanced meal, considering you're getting enough food, but not too much food. So this is kind of another area that I like to think about a lot, and a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is when people say in pregnancy you're eating for two. Well, that is not
Oh.
quite true. I mean, you're eating for two, but you're not eating double the amount of food you should be eating.
Oh, yeah.
So the actual recommendations for how much increased calories you should be having is about 300 calories for both second and third trimester. You don't increase your
Mm.
caloric intake at all in the first trimester, which is maybe not a bad thing if you're experiencing
Oh,
nausea or exhaustion.
yes.
So, but just that's something I always talk about. And then,
Yeah, eating for 2
um,
does not mean the expectation is to eat double.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, you should.
that's a good thing. I feel like that's a
Mhm.
cautionary tale of the dietitian, right? We all have these, like, occupational hazards of pet peeves we have. One of yours is eating for 2. Good to know.
Yes, it is. Yes. So if you say that to me, you will likely get a very angry stare back at you. But another thing during pregnancy is looking at how much weight you're gaining. So too little weight is has been shown to lead to poor outcomes for both mother and baby, and too much weight has also, on the other side, been shown to lead to poor outcomes or not as beneficial of outcomes for mom and baby. So that's just something that you're going to see throughout pregnancy as well.
Yes, and so following, going to those doctor's appointments, measuring for yourself, right, that you can be healthy as you experience pregnancy, and then also measuring for the baby's outcomes, right? So hitting those doctor's appointments, even though sometimes I remember feeling like I was grateful to have the opportunity. I mean, yeah, asking questions. I never had a shortage of those. Grateful to have the opportunity and access going to the doctor, but sometimes it was like, okay, again though. like, right? And for taking off from work or whatever. But they are important. We do want to track our growth and development as well as our babies.
Yes, definitely, and it's an opportune again, I feel like the word this episode is opportunity.
Yeah.
Opportunity for you to ask your doctor all of those questions, or your healthcare provider, about everything you need to know at those appointments.
Yeah. All the are is this normals? Someone was just talking about the other day. They have a stuffy nose. That was like their pregnancy symptom. They just have a stuffy nose the whole pregnancy. And so
Ugh,
yes, there's a lot of reality happening, so different for each of us.
yes. Yeah.
So yeah, we wanted to kind of wrap in this episode. We're flipping things around a little, that we're wrapping in these strategies alongside the specific kind of age segment we're talking about. So yes, lots of great recommendations for pregnancy. And again, we are kind of skimming the surface in terms of recommendations and food and pregnancy. There's lots of information, but we wanted to get through it all here today. And so we're going to move on to this
Oh,
first.
I wanna share
Ooh,
one thing before you move
oh,
on,
there's a good one. We
that I
can't,
that
I
I
won't skip it.
it's more
I'll
of a
let you
it's more of just an interest area of mine. The
Yes.
science is still emerging in this area, so take everything I'm saying with a small grain of salt, and know that a lot of the studies in this area have been in animal models, and
Mm,
it's hard to do any research in pregnancy, right? And especially what I'm
yes.
going to talk about now. But there have been studies that show that flavors in a pregnant mother's diet can make their way into the amniotic fluid, and the resulting exposure could influence a child's flavor preferences after birth. So they've particularly looked at things like garlic and carrots.
Mhm.
So those were the things that were studied. But I just think it's fascinating to think that what I eat
Yes.
during pregnancy, my child may actually be exposed to, and then be predisposed to like that later in life.
Yes. Well, and even I think of like you talk about bitter, like that bitter is typically a flavor that has to kind of grow on us. And I'm like, ooh, what an like that can be an opportunity. I
Hmm.
mean, and yeah, we don't know for certain, right? The science isn't like totally solid and clear, but it's like there are some indications, right? Some studies are showing some promise of like, hey, this could maybe help. I
Hmm.
love that. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm so sorry. I almost skipped that. Wow.
that's okay.
What a detriment that would have
I wasn't
been.
going to let you. I wasn't going
Yeah.
to let you
You're like,
miss
no,
that.
we were gonna say it. Awesome. Okay, well now moving on to the first year. Thinking about 0 to 12 months. And there's a lot happening in this age too, right? You've got like just moving into this here
Hmm.
with your little one. And so some of the things in this age and stage can be the realities, again, still weirdly exhaustion. Right, whether we have a baby that doesn't sleep well or a newborn that doesn't really know how to sleep yet, that hasn't been regulated and things like that. So there's still some tiredness. Also think maternity leave is sometimes, right, so that's something, or hopefully family leave or parental leave, that you can have some time where you're maybe not working. We know that's not a reality for all families, but for some. Also talking about childcare, right? If you have your child in childcare, they can be eating several meals a day at your childcare. And so what is the food that's offered there can be a reality of what's happening around your kids and food. Of course, a big one is related to the whole idea of breastfeeding and formula. For some families, tube feeding, right? All kinds of feeding. That's always a big question in this first year. Another big one, starting solids, right? Lindy and I had a really great
Hmm.
discussion on this in our baby led weaning conversation bonus episode that we offered. You can go hear all about that. We definitely couldn't get into that one today. That'd be the
No,
whole
not enough
episode
time.
again.
Yes. Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, conversations around how do we start solids, thinking about the high chair. What does that mean? How do we use it effectively? And I had my own personal experience with postpartum depression as well. That was a reality that was affecting feeding for me and for my infant. And so there's a lot that happens in this first year.
Yes, and a lot that happens in terms of feeding, and I think this period in time, I think, well, we're almost at the end of it for our
Yeah.
son. He's 11 months old, but um, I this period is was hard, even though I came into his life with this depth of nutrition and feeding knowledge. I still
Hmm.
had questions and was unsure about what I was doing and how to do it. So I feel like you can be an expert in it and still not know what the heck you're doing.
Yeah, yes, that's fair. So it is a
Mhm,
time when we will have questions, when we can, even
mhm.
the most informed of us. There's lots of
Yes.
questions.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, and I do think, the huge conversation often comes down to like how we feed our really tiny babies, right? The conversation around breastfeeding and formula feeding and tube feeding and what that looks like. So tell us about some of those recommendations.
Yes, yeah. So we know that you will read out there everywhere guidelines are that we should support breastfeeding for infants during the first year of life. And then in general, as a parent, we just have more oversight over the quality of food that children are
Mm.
offered from 1 to 3 years old. They have a little bit, obviously less autonomy. They can't go into the pantry for the most part. I guess I'm
Yes.
not there yet. Maybe he'll start doing it when he starts
Maybe.
walking. But we control more of that. We of what actually is being done to a degree, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I mean, you've already talked about your breastfeeding experience a little bit here, but
Yes.
the recommendations are to provide breast milk during that first year of life. But we also know that it's important for your baby to eat. So, kind of
Yes.
the phrase I always go by is "fed is best."
Yes, and yeah, I've shared in previous episodes, you're right, about my experience with breastfeeding and that it we were breastfeeding and I was so set on it and I thought there was no other way, right? Research said that there were benefits to it and the realization that like this isn't working for my baby and for me. And that I wasn't able to be the parent I wanted to be because of the impact it not going well and me forcing myself into it was having. And so, yeah, my child wasn't growing, right? My child was not getting adequate
Mhm.
nutrition, even though we had a lot of support to try to breastfeed. And so I always like to say, like, these are recommendations meant for universal consumption, right? They're meant in general for all families. Here's a recommendation. And luckily, that we as parents can decide what's best for our family for whatever multitude of reasons for your health, for your baby's health, for your mental health, for your access, right, to your time availability, so many factors to consider. This is a general recommendation that you can decide what makes the most sense for your family. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And yes,
and
I
there
always say we feed hungry babies.
feed
Fed is
hungry
best.
babies. Yes, yeah,
Hmm.
and there are supports if you are feeling like you are struggling with breastfeeding and you do want to continue on that journey to the best of your
Yes.
ability. You can always reach out to lactation consultants or WIC is a very good resource
Yes.
that is provided to anyone in need to go and whether it be help getting the tools and tips they need to breastfeed or access to formula, which we know
Mm.
in the recent time has been a difficult thing
Yes.
as well. So if you are struggling, look up that resource and see if it's right for you.
Yes, so lots of things related to breastfeeding formula and yeah, tapping into those resources we have available so that we can feed those hungry babies. So in addition, right, once our kids get a little bit older, we're talking about some food beyond just like bottled breast tube feeding. Talk
Mhm.
about some of these, I mean, what we like to call table foods, right?
Yes, yes. So this is a fun or scary moment in life, right? So at about 4 to 6 months of age, it really depends on the if your child is meeting those developmental milestones that are necessary for them to start getting fed table or complementary food. You can start introducing that food, and then we know that up to 1 years of age, babies should really be reliant on either breast milk or
Mm,
formula for their main feeding source. That table food, it's called complementary feeding because it's in
mm,
addition to providing either breast milk or formula. And then we should
yes.
avoid cow's milk until they're at least 1 year old.
That makes sense. Yes. And so that opportunity to offer, yeah, complimentary, like this comes alongside in addition to kind of the bottle or breastfeeding. And so then thinking about the types of table food that are offered, right? In our baby led weaning, starting solids kind of bonus episode, we talked about some of the criteria of when you might know when it's time to start feeding your baby solid food. But what do we want to be thinking about as we offer those first foods?
Well, probably won't come as a surprise and to any of you that I'm going to say fruit and vegetables should be introduced early and often as
Mhm.
well. So, providing them, daily, having variety is in there as well. So, always variety in
Mhm.
color, variety in choice, diversity in the type of food you're offering, and then repeated exposure of food. We've talked about this before, but
Mhm.
offering and offering again. This is something I struggled with my own son. It's like, oh, well, with first we tried curry with him. We're like, "Oh, he doesn't like curry."
Oh.
And then I had to remind myself, "Okay, we should maybe
Oh.
introduce it again and again and again and again."
Yes, yes.
But those are
Does he
all
eat
some
it now? I'm so curious.
no, he has not quite
Not there
enjoyed it
yet.
yet, but,
Yep, but
maybe
yet is the key
someday.
word.
Yet. But those are just some strategies that we can use And then also just kind of getting into the weeds just a little bit here, but
Mhm.
after 6 months of age, you do have to be really aware of providing an adequate amount of iron for your baby. So that's a
Mm,
nutrient of need after those 6 months specifically, because that's especially for breastfed babies. That's when mother's iron stores start to deplete a little bit, and so they might not be able to provide it through breast milk. So this is when you want to start looking for other sources, and specifically, obviously, from food, which would be meat, seafood,
mhm.
iron fortified cereals, those types of things. So that's something to definitely prioritize. Is something that I prioritize with our son, but then
Mhm.
there are things too on the flip side that you really should avoid. So that's things with added sugar, salt, any kind of sugary drink. It's really
Yes.
recommended. American Academy of Pediatrics, Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommend um, no sugary beverages before the age of 2 years old.
Yes. And so, yeah, as we think about our under 1-year-olds, right, our babies,
Our babies.
our babies, yeah, that we're thinking of, yeah, fruits and vegetables, a great place to start, and then looking for sources of iron in the mix of that table food. And like you said, yeah, complementary.
Hmm.
So I guess, okay, now I'm curious. I have heard the phrase, food under 1 is just for fun. What are your
To
thoughts on that?
To a degree, right? Like I just said, food
Okay,
is
yeah.
important for especially if you're I mean, some formulas could have some well, formula can have fortified with or have added iron, right?
Yes.
But if your baby's breastfeeding, they might not get as much iron. So that table food, that complementary food is really important because that's where they're getting their iron, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, it is fun, but it's also necessary as well. And then going back to not only are we talking about their physical growth and development, if
Mhm.
we're thinking about their behavioral growth and development, introducing food for fun is like, okay, well, let's introduce, this is an opportunity to introduce fruit and vegetables and start
Yes.
to acclimate them to those tastes, that like that bitter that we talked about,
Yes.
so that they can, hopefully grow up to
Mhm.
continue to eat and enjoy those types of food
Yeah.
as
Well, and
well.
even their like gross and fine motor, right? We talk about like their pincher grasp, and those are skills they develop from eating table food. That's a and in part that's part of their development. That's not just food consumption.
Mhm.
So yeah, okay. I just thought of it on the spot, and I was like, oh, I want to ask Lindy's thoughts on this right here
Yes.
now.
Yeah. Oh, I like that you asked that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's twofold answer to that. You
Yeah.
hopefully get to introduce and encourage the lifelong love of this type of food too.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So then that moves us into kind of, yeah, kind of the rest, like the rest of the
Yes.
1000 days, kind of our young toddlers, as our kids get a little bit older, looking at some recommendations and strategies. But first, let's talk about some of that reality.
Yes.
We
Yeah, I know.
may still be experiencing exhaustion. Yeah. You're getting
Mm,
ready. I think I said it before that you were transitioning into this stage. You're
yes.
transitioning into this stage, right?
This is where we are at, and it is still exhausting. Yeah, if not
Yeah.
more exhausting. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole just I don't wanna, like, be like, oh, this just sticks around forever," but it's just like, it's just different. It's just
Hmm.
different.
Yeah.
Um, one of the big ones in this stage where you think about phasing out bottles early in this stage, that's a big feeding thing. When I think about our young toddlers, we start to see more food preferences in our kids, in their kind of toddlerhood, still childcare. And I talk about like when my daughter started preschool, it's like, so like I have to be in charge of your breakfast. Okay,
Mm.
that's new. I'm gonna have to figure that out on weekdays. um, that was new for us because I was used to my kids getting when they were in full time childcare below that age of kind of like 3 or 4, breakfast, lunch, and a snack. They
Mm.
got all of that at childcare, which really meant I was feeding them like one meal a day. And so, what childcare was offering my food was the majority of what they were consuming. So, yes, what childcare offers is a big component. Another kind of reality at this stage is that our kids are getting mobile, whether
Mm.
they are crawlers or climbers, or I had a butt scooter, which still just like, oh my gosh, it was so
Cute. Hmm.
cute. Or they're walking, whatever that mobility might look like. We're looking at that in toddlerhood that can impact how they eat, where they eat, if they can sit long, right? How they sit long enough to
Hmm.
eat in those things. A lot of
How
reality.
often they give the food to the dog.
Yes, yes, my
Hmm.
dog has set up permanent residence next to the youngest child. What like very adept little creatures that those dogs
Hmm.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so there's a lot happening in these young toddler years. Let's look at some of these recommendations again. So, what are some of the strategies and recommendations for our young toddlers?
So, probably not unfamiliar if you listen to the other episodes, but a lot of the strategies are going to persist for this age through older ages. But one of the things that we want to do and start doing at this age is respect the child's appetite.
Mm,
So, provide them that autonomy support, and then also avoid those coercive, clean your plate, restrictive,
yes.
all those practices that we have talked about previously. And then also, you want to think about providing your child the right portion of food. So I know this is a hard one. I think for me, it's because I feel like every parent goes to your pediatrician is like, is he for me, is he eating enough? Is he eating too
Mm,
little? And they're like, well, is he growing? Is he thriving? Is he healthy? I'm like, yes. They're like, well, then, there are standards around portions of
mm,
food, but also, you can fall back on is there proper development and growth.
yes.
So that's one. And then the last I'm going to say here is again, I think we've said this a lot, but please try to avoid using food as a reward for good
Yes.
behavior, whether that be eating food that you want them to eat, or if they don't cry and you give them food, just beware of using food as a reward.
Yes. Of all of that, I think the thing that really stood out for me when my kids were in this stage was that food portion, right? Like not an adult size. And especially as I think
Hmm.
about not trying to coerce them into foods that were unfamiliar, that, yeah, sometimes it was literally like a single green pepper.
Hmm.
That was like the portion they were offered because the goal was to get started. And so thinking about a not so overwhelming plate of food to their tiny little stomachs was really that's I mean, even still, I feel like a learning process. We are at the stage now where we ask our kids a little or a lot. Would you like a little of this? If it's a food they can serve themselves, we try to let them. But yeah, if it's something really messy or really hot or whatever, and asking, okay, at least do you want a little or a lot of this? And during this stage was when my oldest never really took to baby signs, but my youngest did a little. And so during this stage, we tried to do like more or all done. Those are basically like the only two signs we used with our child. But yeah, could he tell us, okay, I want more of that, or I'm all done with this food? Things like that. And so that portion, and yeah, how can we honor their cues at this age with this feeding?
Yes, yeah, and maybe their cues. We try to do some baby sign language. Our son decided to make up his own sign language, and
Yeah,
more just meant slamming his hands on
like
his high chair.
here we go.
Yeah,
I
I
love it.
want more. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, so what else are we looking at in addition to like portions?
Okay, so
What are
for
some other recommendations?
other recommendations, I'm gonna shift to. So this is again, we're thinking about transitioning away from bottles, right? Phasing out of
Mm-hmm.
bottles, going to a different source of liquids per se, and then also
Mm-hmm.
changing where our focus of where our nutrition is coming from. So
Mm-hmm.
for 1 to 3 years old, this is when they transition to whole cow's milk. So
Yes.
the recommendation is whole cow's milk for a lot of reasons. One, it's going to have the fat and protein content that you're going to want to see for your little babe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know that our society has a lot of people will push like, oh no, skim milk, 1%.
Mm,
For babies, you want to do whole milk. Don't skimp out here. It's
yes.
really important to provide that. And then also a lot of whole milk in general is fortified with vitamin D, which is another
Love that.
vitamin nutrient of need for those kiddos.
Mhm,
And
and
then
they
I
do need that fat content. They do need that vitamin D that's important to how they grow. So yeah, it might be counterintuitive in some ways, but that's what our kids need at this age.
Yes, yes.
Mhm,
Cow's whole milk. And if you do decide, whether it be for reasons of allergies or personal preferences, to do a plant-based
mm,
milk, I would recommend talking to your doctor, a dietitian, a healthcare professional about it. Right now, the only substitute for cow's milk for plant-based would be soy milk. And even
mm,
then, just look at the protein and fat content of it, see if
yeah.
it's comparable, if it's fortified with vitamin D. But those are really that's only really the recommended alternative to whole cow's milk at this age.
Okay, that's good to know that. Yeah, there's a lot of milk alternatives nowadays, and so like, which of these is okay? Soy milk is currently the only recommended alternative. Good to
But
know.
there are really great one I mean, I know plenty of kids kiddos with allergies. So it's
Mhm.
not to say there aren't those out there as well. Just make sure
Yeah.
you're talking to a doctor or a dietitian that would be an expert in this area to find those best brands for your kids and not just buy something
Yes.
right off the shelf unless you feel like you're very confident about reading a nutrition label, which I would
Yes.
say if a lot of people might not feel confident enough.
Yes, yes. And well, and you even in just some conversations that we've had, you've talked about like the profile of what's in it, right? The balance of like fat, vitamin D, like all of the things it needs. I can't even list them all, right? Like I've been doing this podcast with you and I don't remember all of them. But yeah, that the profile of what's offered within that milk alternative is important to keep in mind for sure.
Mhm. Yes.
One of the things I loved about these recommendations, yeah, I loved that it got into some of these specifics of, yeah, which milks and thinking about some of the strategies we talked about and some of the practices in previous episodes. But I liked that it also talked about kind of just like non-food feeding recommendations, which sounds a little like what'd you say? Like oxymoron, but some of the strategies beyond just what we feed our kids, kind of the how that was important too, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It, I think screen time is a big one that
Mm,
you'll hear a lot of pediatricians, nutrition experts talk about because one, you want to make sure that your children are able to focus on their feeding, right? If they're learn those hunger, those fullness cues, and maybe they won't be able to do that if they're in front of a screen. And then it also,
mhm.
in addition to that, offers that opportunity to sit with a parent and have them model did the type of feeding behaviors you want them to have.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, I even think of yeah, if we sit down with a bag of chips in front of the TV, how quick is that bag of chips gone? It's like I really wasn't planning to eat the whole bag, or I really wasn't that hungry. And like, yeah, ooh, is that the modeling I want to be
Yes.
doing? Maybe not. But yeah, so that it makes sense that a screen can be a distraction for adults too,
Oh
from
yeah.
listening to those hungerfulness cues.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's interesting. And then there was a little bit around like sleep and moving our body too, right?
Yes, yeah. So encouraging kids to be physically active and then get, an adequate amount of sleep if, that's possible. I know it's not always,
Yeah.
the parents want it
It
is
can be
just
a
as much
challenge.
at this age, but really supporting the environment to allow them to do that and the activities will help one with that, you talked about energy in, energy out, that
Mhm.
energy balance but it will also help your kiddos if they're active and they get enough sleep, then they will be hungry and they'll, eat the food that they should be eating.
Yes, well, and that I think of the overall, regulation that goes into, like, how their body regulates with, like, yeah, that energy consumption. Is energy rest? That doesn't make any sense, but, like, sleep, that's what I wanna call it, like, energy consumption being food,
Mm,
energy
so
output, what is
we're
it?
no longer calling it sleep, it's energy rest now. That
Yes,
is.
energy rest. Makes no sense, but that's what feels right. Energy consumption, energy rest, energy output is like the regulation cycle of the body now. Okay. You heard
Uh,
it here.
yeah.
I feel like no researchers will buy into it, but we're gonna go with it. So yeah, that all of those things kind of work together and do impact our child's overall health, which is the goal, right? When we're
Mhm.
talking about healthy, independent eaters, healthful kids. Um, okay, so we've covered pregnancy, we've covered the first year, and then yeah, and the rest of the 1,000 days. As we think about that, we kind of wrapped in our strategies at each age, but I just want to give you like one more chance. Like, if you're going to give like final advice, final words of insight and wisdom to parents thinking about this first 1,000 days in food, what would you say? What will you
Oh,
say? Because I'm asking.
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, it's 1,000 days, which sounds like a long time, but it's not a lot of time, but it is, again, this opportunity, this window to have this impact on your child's life and um, offer them the foods that are going to benefit them for forever, not only in terms of their physical growth, but their behavioral growth as well. And just to reassure you that there's lots of resources out there
Mhm.
to help you navigate this that we didn't talk about today because we don't have the time. So, Dietary Guidelines for Americans, one that I recommended, My Plate, associated
Mm.
with dietary guidelines, the American Academy for Pediatrics, all have really great tools and tips to help support your journey in the first 1,000 days of life.
Oh, awesome. Yes, so many great resources. And I think I just like, okay, I asked the question. Now I'm like, no, I want to answer it though too. I don't have
Oh,
the
yeah.
food expertise, but just yeah, from a balanced perspective, I think, or hope it's balanced. As a parent myself and thinking about the feeding and the pressure we often put on these, first 1000 days and the transitions we're experiencing and that all of these decisions are wrapped in like, I mean, those nesting dolls of like, who is my child? Who am I? What are our values? What are our practices? What are the realities of the support that I have, like my mental health and the community around us and where we live and food act like there's these huge things that all influence what our kids eat. Like let's not forget. Um, and that we make food decisions within that reality. Like how much food we have access to, where we get our food, what type of food. And I also like to remind parents like your experience as a parent is an important decision factor in these things too, right? That like your own mental health, your own sanity, and those things like not that one is the most like the biggest priority and that none of the rest exist, but like these all coexist. We'll make decisions based on all of them together. So yeah, as we share guidelines, I'm always like, okay, and okay, and right. Not
Mhm,
saying we don't want to follow, but like we can take them in to help make our decisions. And I think that's what's important.
mhm.
So I think that brings us. I asked you a last final advice, and now we're going to bring in Mackenzie DeYoung, our podcast producer, to ask us, hopefully not a too tricky, but a question around our topic today.
Actually, the funny thing is I think that the question that Barb came up with, um, was it's kind of along the same lines. It's kind of like an
Oh,
add-on to that. I actually one part it was going to be a two-part question. You kind of answered some of it. But so if say I'm a parent and whether it be in the breastfeeding or bottle feeding stage or as I'm starting to introduce table foods, even as I'm introducing like cow's milk and that if I notice that like there's an issue, if I have a fussy baby that, it's continue like my baby is continually like seeming to not that food's not agreeing with my
mm,
baby, they're starting, maybe those dietary issues. Um, First, I guess the two-part question is, first of all, like, where do I start? What do I do
mm,
if, like, all of a sudden I'm noticing, like, one of my nephews is lactose intolerant? Where would, they start as you start introducing that cow's milk? What do I do if I don't know that,
mhm,
I don't have those resources or with formula, those sorts of things? And then the other side of it is, what can I do to support my own mental health? Because that is really, really tough and really, really stressful. And I say
mhm,
I'm not a parent
mm,
yet, but
mm,
for those parents that are dealing with this, what recommendations would you give?
mm.
Well, I feel more, prepared to answer the first part of that
And
question,
I
and
feel
I would
prepared to answer the second.
yeah, I was gonna say I would love to hear what Mackenzie has to say about that second part because, yeah, we all need that, but, for resources, I mean, I think the first line of defense for any of that is to go to your pediatrician, and
Mhm,
ask that healthcare professional, and then they might send you to an expert in this area. So there are wonderful pediatric dietitians, and I'm a dietitian, so I'm biased here, that can help provide tips and tools and resources and are just have the toolbox prepared to guide parents through allergies or intolerances, those types of things there. And there's some great even reputable resources on social media that
mm,
I think you can find, but again, look for someone who's a pediatrician or a dietitian or has that background to
mhm.
provide that information. But I would say go to your pediatrician and ask them for that advice first, and then they will provide additional resources. And then I already mentioned this, but I think WIC is you can use
Sure.
that pregnancy all the way to up to the age of 5 a family can use
Yes.
it. So that is a great way because not only will they provide you a supplemental funds to go buy more
Mhm.
food, to go buy the type of food you need.
Yes.
They're also going to provide you some nutrition screening and some education and things like that as well.
Um,
Absolutely.
Quick question about WIC. WIC is Women, Infants, and Children, right? Is what
Mhm.
it stands for, and it's a
Yes.
federal program available to basically anyone pregnancy through 5, right? Or are there
It
other guidelines?
There are some other guidelines, largely around if you need it for like a nutritional inadequacy reasons
Mm,
or income reasons. And
got
it
it.
is a federal program that is facilitated, administered by the state. So you would go
Okay.
through your state to get on WIC.
All right. That's
Perfect.
great to
Thank
know.
you.
Yeah. And speaking to the kind of mental health side of these decisions, one, right? Like the variety of emotions of like guilt, of shame, of,
Mhm.
yeah, is this happening to my child because of what I did? Or, right. So there's this huge variety of emotions we can experience when there are challenges with feeding because it is critical, right? Like they've got to
Yeah.
eat to grow and all those things. And so I think one part is acknowledging like you're allowed to have those feelings. Don't should yourself, as Mackenzie DeYoung has
Right.
taught us to say.
Yeah.
Um, right? Validate those feelings that you're allowed to feel them. Seek support, whether that's a mental health professional, a family or friend, but someone that can kind of validate what you're experiencing, who can be supportive of the decisions that you're making. Another thing that I hope can kind of provide you some optimism as a listener, if you're experiencing this too, there are some studies that show that basically it can be more complex than this, but essentially that when parents have a concern, they tend to be on the right track. So if you have a feeling, you have these instincts, you know your child, not necessarily like I had a concern and it was because of this huge thing, but
Mhm.
if you have the concern, ask the question is kind of generally what I would say. And so trusting that you do have good instincts, that you do know your child, what they're typically like, trusting yourself with that. And then, yeah, I always say seeking out that support for mental health. I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy in lots of different points of my life. I'm a big proponent of it. I know access to that can be challenging, but that there's a lot of information, trustworthy information from different organizations too, that becoming a parent is a huge transition time in your mental health and your hormones and all of these things. And so that it's okay to seek professional help for those things. And especially as you think about supporting it so you can be the kind of parent you want to be. There's been times in my parenting journey where I haven't felt like the kind of parent I wanted to be because of
Mhm.
my mental health. So big proponent. Your life matters too and the experience that your kids have. So if you're having a hard time, like you're not able to parent the way you want. So that's my soapbox. Your mental health is definitely a significant thing, and lots of emotions that go with it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and just as an aside, I totally didn't mean to set this up for this, but we have done a season on self-care for a parent,
Absolutely.
right? Season was that 2? Season 2, I
Yep,
think?
season 2 on
So if
self-care.
if you're looking for ways to better take care of yourself, go back and listen to that, look for other resources. We have lots of resources through extension.
Mhm.
Or like Mackenzie said, seek out a therapist, but sometimes it's hard to start there. So
Yes.
sometimes those easier, more public resources might be easier
Yep.
to access and an easier bite to take of those
Yes.
resources.
Good
Mhm.
place
Good
to start.
one. Good.
A
Was that a
bite?
food
Oh, she
pun?
got a food pun. I wanted to say low-hanging fruit.
So
I
funny.
didn't say it, but
That's
there
a
it is.
low-hanging fruit, and I didn't even mean to.
Good one.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank
Mackenzie's in the tally. She's in the
Yes,
running.
yes, yeah.
I'm gonna have to, as I'm editing all these, episodes, just keep adding.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Awesome.
alright, well, thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question, Kens. There's a lot of good stuff on feeding in this first 1,000 days. I mean, thanks for sharing lots of great recommendations with us, Lindy, and thinking about there's different stages. There's reality that impacts it. Ultimately, kind of this idea of variety, that division of responsibility, that we get to provide our kids with lots of important nutrition for their growth and development in this first 1,000 days. So that's what we were looking at today. And where are we moving next, Lindy? What's next week?
Okay, so next week we're just moving up in age, and we're going to look at preschoolers and school age kids and talking about obviously food.
Yeah, still food. Yes, we're excited to dig into kind of this older age. So thanks for joining us on the Science of Parenting podcast today. If you haven't heard, we are available for questions if you have them. You can email us at parenting@iastate.edu with your parenting questions. And this season, even with your food questions, we'll pass them along
Mhm.
to our expert, Lindy.
Yes, yes. Okay, so come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.